At dawn's first light, the high priests, with the religious leaders and scholars, arranged a conference with the entire Jewish council. After tying Jesus securely, they took him out and presented him to Pilate.
I can't sleep. I just can't sleep. To think that I, Pontius Pilate, the governor of the Middle East and the friend to the... I can't sleep. I just can't sleep. To think that I, Pontius Pilate, the governor of the Middle East and the friend to the emperor, by my will people live and die. To think that I can't sleep, it's madness. I've more money than I know what to do with, more fame and power than anyone for miles. Yet when I lay down, I can't bring the gentle embrace of sleep. Instead, I toss and I turn, I tangle in my sheets, I sweat in my struggle. How many have I said to the devil before? Countless men and women. They're all the same. They cry and argue passionately that they're innocent. Then when they realize that the game is up, they beg and plead. I stay composed, show no mercy. Then when a sentence is given, they let loose. They curse me, scream at me, promise revenge and murder for me and my family. I just shrug and turn as they're dragged away to be crucified. Their final words, a distant echo, quickly forgotten. But now, each time I close my eyes, I see his face. This man, this Jesus was different. They threw him before me, and the crowd began to yell at all the supposed crimes this man had done. But he didn't cry. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He stood there, and he listened. If they kept yelling, he kept silent. My courthouse was becoming a madhouse, but as his accusers screamed louder and louder, Jesus continued to stand silent, just looking at all who hurled abuse. Normally the victims were the ones who yelled and argued and cried. Not this time. This was different. And as the mob continued their fury, increasingly sounding like the desperate shouting of the guilty men and women I was so used to, Jesus, he turned his head. He looked at me. His eyes were not brimming with hatred or fear. His muscles not tensed in fury, and his teeth were not bared in desperation. But he looked at me, and in that instant, I saw the face of a man who was controlled. I saw the face of a man who seemed to understand something more than everything else, more than all of this. I saw the face of a man who looked at me with a look of deep compassion and love. I lost my composure. Just for a second, my usually steely gaze quivered, and I could feel my eyebrows raise in surprise and question. Quickly, I resumed my look of control, and I called Jesus in for a proper investigation. As I asked him questions, he continued to stay quiet. He continued to look at me, and I grew increasingly uncomfortable. When this man looked at me, I felt like he saw behind the masks of power and wealth I'd created. When he looked at me, he saw my fears of the crowd. He saw through the facade and saw my doubts about Rome, the way I desperately held onto power, my problems with anger, my fears of the future. As he looked at me, I realized that this man was different. He was in control. He was not afraid. Stammering, I asked him, are you king? That is what they're saying. And he replied, you have said so. Quickly I said, don't you get it? I have the power to kill or let you live. And he smiled. Then quietly he said to me with words that have long lingered in my mind, the only power you have has been given you by God. My kingdom is his kingdom. He said no more. The screams of the outside crowd grew louder. They were baying for his blood. Who would I trust? Who would I follow? The words of the masses fueled by hatred and anger, or the words of Jesus, driven by love and truth. And I turned him over to the crowds. I gave him up. I let him go to be nailed to some wooden beams. And this man was different. His words, his look, his composure, I can't shake them. This man was different, and I just can't sleep.
Pilate gave the crowd what it wanted, set Barabbas free, and turned Jesus over for whipping and crucifixion. The soldiers took Jesus into the palace and called together the entire brigade. They dressed him up in purple and put a crown plaited from thorn bush on his head. Then they began their mockery. "Bravo, King of the Jews!" They banged on his head with a club, spit on him, and knelt down in mock worship. After they had had their fun, they took off the purple cape and put his own clothes back on him. Then they marched out to nail him to the cross.